My Gavan and Melonin, and well met indeed. I'm Arachir Galadirthan, head of the modding team behind Divide and Conquer, and welcome to Divide and Conquer, a developer diary. I believe this is number 31, I think. So we're going to go over everything that's happened in the mod. There are, you'll be pleased to hear, unlike last time, there are some unit changes that we can show you, or I can show you at the end of the video. So there is going to be a campaign section and a unit section, but it is, unfortunately, again, predominantly going to be based around the campaign map today. So we shall start with generic changes first, and then we'll go into some more specific changes. And allow me to just caveat straight away, there's not going to be much to see while I talk about the campaign map, other than the campaign map itself. So I apologise for that. But we shall dive straight in then. So the first change to everything is the Garrison Buildings now give more units. So the Garrison Building can be found here. First of all, they've been renamed from Armory and Militia Armory to Militia Garrison and Military Garrison. And they now tell you how many units that you will get. Provides 2 garrison units when the settlement is assaulted. They give 2 units at tier 1 now as standard, but sometimes you might get a little more if you're in specific key settlements. And they give 3 units at tier 2 as standard, but the tier 2 units come with 5 XP, 1 armor and 1 melee. So the tier 2 units are slightly better, and it makes it a far more worthwhile building to get. But remember, if you don't like garrisons, you can simply not build it. Next thing is a geographical change. There's a couple of them to list. And that is that a permafrost has been added around the ice bay of Foreshell. And here you can see it curling all the way around the bay and heading out to the east, where it joins up with the ice and snow reaching out from Carn Dum. So there's a bit more snow up here in the north, which was long requested. It could probably be a bit further, but it was refined and reworked by Arcade over some time, and we found a sort of happy medium of where we want it. And speaking of snow, snow has returned to the tops of certain mountains, as you can see here, so that they now no longer look like just great large masses of grey, and they now actually have some snowy peaks, and it's applied to all of them. So there's just a tiny little visual change there, so that the mountains feel a little more unique, and they have a little bit of snow on the tops. Next up is our thanks extended to Liam Taylor, who's known on the Discord as Special Sunday, for he has re-recorded voice lines for the Anduin, Dol Amroth and Dunland in slightly higher quality, and entirely bespoke for the way that the game generates and uses them. So those 3 nations, Anduin, Dol Amroth and Dunland, have better voice lines now. The quality has improved. Arcade has slightly increased the distance at which tree models are rendered on battle maps. So you'll get a few more trees on battle maps and a little less flickering depending on where you are on the map, which is quite good. Another one of thanks being extended out is to a gentleman called Hooded Horse on Discord, for he revealed to us something which has long been unknown in our team, and that's the true and proper way of making the mercenary file work. So the mercenary file, something we did not know before, and possibly, and in all the guides I've read about the mercenary file, actually nobody mentions this. So I feel like this is quite big news, but I'm sure many other modders know. But essentially, every single region in the game is put into a pool. That's how the mercenaries work. So they are pools of mercenary units. So say I want a Mirkwood unit, it can come from anywhere in the Mirkwood area, and each region goes into a pool that we can call whatever we want. So here we'll call it Mirkwood. And then if I train a unit in this region, in Elven Acres, that will then deplete that unit if I then wanted to also train it down here in the Naked Hill region. So that's how the pools work. That's the basic premise. But nowhere in the file does it suggest that you can't have regions in multiple pools. But in truth, that is exactly accurate. You cannot have a region in more than one pool. And by having it in more than one pool, it completely breaks the pool that it is then in. So essentially, our mercenary file just did not work. There were almost no instances of mercenary units. But he brought this to our attention, then I went through the mercenary file and I made sure that every single region only appears once. I had to make some extra pools to make it work, but now the mercenaries work as intended. And I extended where the mercenaries can be trained as well, so there's far more mercenary presence now in version 5. They work properly, so that's a fantastic start. And then the last one, I think, which is a thanks to Other modders goes out to one of our new testers and a gentleman who I believe has a YouTube channel, and that is Sir Orgemund, who very kindly went through and finally wrote all of the Green Book information for us. So now when you play version 5, if you want to know what scripts your nation has and if you have any unique recruitment aspects of your gameplay, they will now be listed in your capital city's Green Book. So for Gondor, obviously it's the Pelennor Fields, but it does of course mean if you lose your capital, you lose the ability to see and read those bits of information, but that is where they can now be found. So at the bottom of these ones. Now the only little interesting thing which I thought was interesting, I tried to change it but I can't really get around it, is that Khazad-dûm, Moria and Khazad-dûm share the same capital region. So the Green Book for Moria and Khazad-dûm has the Moria info and then the Khazad-dûm info, so you get a little bit of a cheat if you're playing as one or the other, because you'll learn what the other one might be able to do. But thanks to Sir Orgemund for finally finishing those off for us. Small point related to the garrison. The Shire has now properly been set up with garrison units, and previously all 3 regions were omitted, so you didn't get any garrison troops here, but now you do. That was a bug reported on Discord. It's a very, very minor point, but I just wanted to put that one in to show you that we do indeed see the bugs on Discord, and we change the most egregious ones usually. Some of them still make it through if we don't think it's worth our time, to be honest, because there's better things and uses we can do with our time than very, very, very minor bugs, which is a point of contention. I'm sure some people will moan at me about that. Next up, the construction time and cost of huge cities, fortresses and citadels have all been reduced. Huge cities are fairly common, but fortresses and citadels are incredibly rare, and only the Ardenaeum, Gondor, Dol Amroth and the Northern Dunedain actually get them. And they are, of course, all unique. They are the Osgiliaths, they are Anuminas and Fornost, and in time they will be Tharbad as well. And the reduction, they are quicker and easier to build. In addition, RK has edited the battle map for Onazanar, which is over here, and you can now deploy units on the gatehouse for that specific battle map. So that one's just a little easier to defend. The arrow towers in Zagkala have now been applied properly, and they work well. So Zagkala is much easier to defend now than it was previously. And lastly, this one applies to generally the whole map. There are quite a few locations specifically near to Cirith Ungol and around the region of Dantilad, which is here. There's a few instances where river crossings or just generally buggy battle maps have been fixed. Something that many of you come across, of course. Medieval 2 is one of the few Total War games that generates the battle map based on where you are actually fighting. So if one of the armies is standing on the sides of a mountain and the other's attacking up, you'll always be fighting uphill. And that's a fantastic system, and I think it's absolutely excellent, and it adds a level of dynamic gameplay that is lost in games like Warhammer 2. However, it does then mean that if a river goes through a steep region, which of course it can absolutely do, the battle map is usually unplayable. But RK has been tirelessly going around whenever one of these unplayable battle maps has been reported, and he's been fiddling with the terrain to make it so that they work properly. Speaking of arrow towers, as we did with Zagkala, baluster towers have been slowed down in their fire rates, so they are far less deadly now. Now, that doesn't mean that your troops are going to survive any better. Towers are still very deadly, but it does mean that your siege equipment may now actually make it to the walls. Because the baluster, of course, only really shoots siege equipment, and if it hits troops, it's just a lucky bonus. But the baluster towers don't tend to fire on units. They always target siege, and they fired a little too quickly, so the siege equipment was dying far too fast, so they've been slowed down. This one is not generic, but dealing with Darwinian, Edwardwin and Avalyn, the two generals that spawn depending on the side that you take. If you side with the Avari, then Avalyn spawns when you side with the Avari, but then sometime later Edwardwin will spawn and bring the troops that you are no longer able to train. This is something we all know. But that secondary spawning of the army that you didn't choose, that now comes in when you, as Darwinian, hold 12 regions, including Mornadel. So it comes in far later in the game now, and it relies on you to expand out in order to get that bonus. Primarily because, of course, they spawn with all the troops that you didn't get. Many of them are very late-game elite units, so it can be, unfortunately, make the campaign a little too easy as you suddenly get this sort of doom stack. So now you need to actually have conquered and claimed land in order to get the benefit of those armies. The Balrog General, of course, none of you have actually fought against him yet because it hasn't been released anyway, but the Balrog General that spawns in Buzzradum affixed a little bug whereby he kept spawning as the General of the Catapult and not spawning with his actual Balrog bodyguard unit. So that has been fixed, which is good. And then the last generic change, before we go into some more specific nation changes, are the charge calculations in the battle map, which we are applying across the board. Now, I fully am aware and appreciate and understand that many of you will have your own opinions on how charge ratings should be calculated, but I am just going to run you through what we have settled on in order to unify the charges across the board. So, a little bit of backstory on this. Charge ratings have always been made up by us, basically. So, we look at, I mean, we haven't done unit balancing for a long time because we think it's fairly where we want it, and we only have to balance things when new units come along. And there's the odd tweak every now and then, but there's no major national overhauls on the horizon. But we would normally base a faction off of something else that's already in the game. So when we set up Gundabad, for example, the latest nation to be added, we knew we wanted them to be slightly stronger orcs, so we based them on another orc nation. I think in their case, we probably based them on Isengard. It was a long time ago, I can't remember. And then we think up what attack we want each unit to have, what kind of charge we think it would have, and we go for that. But what I have seen throughout the mod is that then leads really bizarre situations where a charge stat for a unit in one nation, which should be very low, is very high, bizarrely, and then in another nation, that same exact type of unit might have twice the charge or half the charge, and it makes absolutely no sense. A keen example of this is Berserker units. So Dunland and Enedwythe both have early tier Berserker style units, and so their charge bonuses should be relatively similar. There's almost nothing that separates them. Neither of them really wears any armor. They're both very fast. They're both wildmen berserkers. Why would one be so much better at charging than another? And I don't really like that. I'd like to try and apply uniformity across the board with all of our unit stats, and that is what we're doing with the charge bonuses. So the charge bonuses are calculated as follows, and whilst your points, and please feel free to comment on the way that we are editing the charges, but do note that we've gone through pretty much the entire roster so far, and we're happy with the outcome. And remember that this does not have to be an exact science. I've already seen someone try and explain scientifically why a decision is wrong. And we're not trying to make it realistic per se, we're just trying to make it uniform. So the same equation has been applied to every single unit, so that now you know if you've got the best charging units in the game now are dedicated elite charging cavalry, as you'll see in a moment. Units like Knights of the Silver Swan or the Lok Inas Rim of Rune. They're the best units in the game for charging. They have the highest charge bonus. And so you'll have that feeling. You will know, I've got a unit that should be good at charging. I look at its charge, and it is. We won't have situations where elite dwarven units have a lower charge than Gondor militia, which is exactly a situation we had. So that's the reasoning behind it. So the actual calculation is as follows. The base charge for a foot unit starts at 4. And then it's affected then plus or minus 1 by its speed. So if a unit is faster than 100%, it gains plus 1. And if it's slower than 100%, it loses 1. So that's the first modifier. Then we look at its armor. So 0, if its armor is between 0 and 4, it loses a charge. If it's between 5 and 12, there's no effect. And if it's 13 or greater, it gains a point on the charge. And then we look at its weapon type, or purpose is another word for this. So if it has a two-handed weapon or it dual wields, then it gains plus 3 to its charge, because those, of course, are dedicated charging units. If it has a shield, regardless of the secondary weapon, if it is shielded, then it gains plus 1. And if it is a pike or a halberd, it doesn't gain or lose a charge. And if it only has one-handed weapon, so no shield and no secondary weapon, some archer units, for example, only have a sword when they finish with their arrows, then it loses a point to its charge. And then finally, there is a race or sometimes nation modifier as well. So all snow orcs are given plus 2 because they are the most aggressive. Then wild men, Haradrim, dwarves of Erebor and the woodland realm all get plus 1. Apologies, there's a lot of information in a short space, but feel free to pause and take it in if you're that interested. The Dunedain, the Northmen, the Eastmen, which is Rune and Cand, Lothlorien, the High Elves, Eredluin, Khazad-dûm, all Orcs and all Uruk don't get any modifier at all. And then finally, Goblins and Hobbits lose 1 on their charge. So that's infantry. And then if we go over to Serolond, where we will find Herluin of Pinnith Gelin. Oh, we don't need him, we just need the cavalry militia. Then the cavalry is slightly different. So the base charge for a cavalry unit is now 6. So it's 2 higher than the foot unit as standard. And then again, the same speed modifier. So if it's faster or slower than 100%, it gains or loses a point. And then we have also stuck with armor here as well, because it's a good way of measuring, generally speaking, the tier that unit is at without using tier, because I did not want to use tier as a modifier, because that is, again, arbitrary. Just because a unit comes in at tier 3 does not mean it should be a good charging unit. An example in my mind that I always think of is the Udej Marines of Rune, who are quite a late game unit. But why would they have a good charge? They're bomb throwers, and then they just have a sword after that. They'd have a nothing charge. So I didn't want tier to be a calculation. So we've stuck with armor for cavalry because it then approximates tier, but again in a more, dare I say, scientific way, because we're then applying the armor we've given. And armor stats, generally speaking, do reflect where or when the unit might come in. But the Udej Marine is a good example, because even though they're a later game unit, they have a lower armor stat. So they would then lose that charge bonus, which they should. Whereas if we did it purely on tier, they'd get a higher charge than they need. So armor is the next thing. Again, it's 0 to 4, they'd lose a point in charge. If it's 5 to 12, there's no effect. And if it's 13 or greater, they gain a point. Then weapon and purpose. So any lance cavalry gain +3 to their charge. Any spear cavalry gain +1. A cavalry unit that just has a sword doesn't get any modifier. And a cavalry unit, basically horse archers, all lose a point, regardless of the secondary weapon that they have. They all lose a point because that's not their primary purpose. Then again, there's race or nation. So any cavalry unit for Dol Amroth gains +3. Rohan, Cand, and the High Elves then get +1. Haradrim, Anduin, Northmen, any other type of elf, Dunedain, and Eastmen all then get no modifier. And unfortunately for the Wargs, if they have an Orc, an Uruk, or a Goblin rider, they gain -1. Now the point of the race or nation is that the only other things that would affect how good a cavalry unit is in battle, to my mind, is the skill at which the rider can command the horse. So that's the application we've applied there. With Dol Amroth being the elite heavy-hitting cavalry, they have the highest charge bonus. And then Rohan, Cand, and the High Elves being the next best cavalry command, they would then get the next point. We have deliberately there made Dol Amroth better to emphasise the fact that they are late game charging cavalry or heavy hitters. Rohan, though, still get fantastic results from this. So it's only really the Knights of the Silver Swan that now really shine higher than they maybe did before. And then finally with horses, if the horse is what we've called a cataphract, which is that if the horse itself has some form of armor, a sort of, I can't remember the name that they call it, but if the horse actually wears armor, is barded, like the Knights of the Silver Swan, like the Royal Guard of Anuminas, or Arthedain, sorry, then it will gain +3 to its charge. If it is what we have called a thoroughbred horse, which is a horse actually meant for war, then it gains +1. And if it is what we have defined as a peasant horse, i.e. one that's just been thrown into battle because war is on them and the farmers are having to take to the fields, then there is no modifier at all. There are very, very few peasant or cataphract horses. Almost every horse in the game is basically a thoroughbred. So that's the charge bonuses. What it in practice has meant is that most cavalry now have a slightly higher charge than they did before, but across the infantry line there's little to no change, to be honest, but a unit will now have a better charge if it should. If it is a dedicated charging unit, so it has a two-handed weapon, it's a faster speed, then it will be better at charging. As I say, many of you may dispute the method that we have taken and chosen, but we're not aiming for 100% realism, we're just aiming for uniformity, and that to us seemed the best method of doing so. So, that is the generic changes, then on to some more specific ones. Over in Imladris, the twins, Elladan and Elrohir, and Gildor actually, have been given small families at the start of the game. So many people reported that when Elladan and Elrohir were sent off map, they no longer had any children, even when they came back. So we've given them some pre-born children so that their family trees can flourish. So that's quite handy. In Isengard, the Orthanc Guard and the Orthanc Sentries now both have an Orthanc Guard-looking banner carrier instead of an Uruk, so that when they fight for the Northern Dunedain, they no longer have an Uruk fighting for the Northern Dunedain, which of course makes absolutely no sense. And in addition, there's now a Northern Dunedain texture version of the banner that they actually carry. So now if you're playing as a Northern Dunedain and you take Isengard, there's less of an egregious immersion break when you've got an Uruk with a white hand banner marching at the front of your army. Speaking of the Northern Dunedain, I think I've made this well known in campaigns, but the Northern Dunedain are now called the Dunedain of Arnor and no longer called the Northern Dunedain. And Aragorn has been renamed to High King Aragorn instead of Chieftain, which I know flies in the face of their setting as the Northern Dunedain, but it is in preparation of the sort of halfway house we have to use, the Kalmar Union, for the reunited kingdom, so that now Aragorn will be the High King of the reunited kingdom, and it's a small price to pay to have him as the High King of the Dunedain. Of course, he is technically the High King, he's just not been crowned yet, so I don't think it's that bad. And if you do think it's that bad, then the reunited kingdom, you'll have to search your soul. Would you rather have an accurate Aragorn and no reunited kingdom, or would you rather have a reunited kingdom? Those are the questions. The fords of the Isen previously didn't actually work properly, but RK has now meticulously gone over the battle map and ensured that it works as intended, so a nice little fix for the fords of Isen. The Aradanaim now gain culture faster in any coastal region. And remember, coastal regions also applies to major sailable rivers as well. So yes, if you sail all the way to Tharbad, that is considered a coastal region. So the Ardanaim can spread easier if they settle on the coast, which of course you almost certainly will do at the start of the game. And it means that if you head away from the south, it's a little less punishing. Anduin's faction leader has been renamed from Huntmaster to Lord, as Beorn has briefly apparently been referred to as that in the book. It'll be obviously in The Hobbit, and I can't remember each page off the top of my head, but if he's been called a Lord, we'd rather that than a made-up name. So he is now Lord Beorn and not Huntmaster. Also, the forts on the River Anduin have been moved ever so slightly closer to the river, because of course the Anduin in the last developer diary I showed that they get one boat at the start of the game, and they can use it to sail up and down the river to assist in their defence. And so the forts have been moved ever so slightly closer so that they can basically act as ferry ports. So you can keep your troops free upkeep, waiting for the ferry, and then jump in the ferry, and then you're on your way. So it's a nice little boost for them. Away to the east, the town of Elgar is no longer, and is now the castle of Elgar, which just gives Rune another castle and another point to start training their armies from, because of course castles are better. Also, Boromir down in the south, everyone's favourite son, and Sean Bean, everyone's favourite actor. Did you know that he voices Civilization 6 in lines? I did not until I started playing it. But anyway, Boromir now has Osgiliath veterans as his bodyguard, because of course Boromir is quite possibly the most famously remembered for holding Western Osgiliath, and indeed reclaiming it, I believe. And so having a unit that's actually called Osgiliath veterans in the game, it would be foolish to not have them as his bodyguard. Which does make him arguably a little stronger, because he now starts with an excellent archer, and when they finish with their arrows, of course, they're fantastic sword and shield units. So a really solid bodyguard for Boromir. But that's not all for Boromir, as we shall see when we do the battle map in a moment. So we'll talk about him again later. Now, the Nazgul will now unlock at certain turns for Mordor when you play as Gondor. So previously, again, I don't think the locked Nazgul were in version 4.5, so this is me reporting on a point that you haven't even got in your games yet, if memory serves. But the Nazgul are locked, and they come in every 10 turns when you play as Mordor, but they also come in every 10 turns when anyone else plays as anyone else. So if you play as Anduin, for example, Mordor don't get all of their Nazgul in one go. They unlock every 10 turns. The exception for that was Gondor. The Nazgul would unlock all at once, so Gondor, it was quite a hard campaign as you had all the Nazgul to fight against. But it was considered that it didn't really work very well, because the AI grouped them all together and put them into one army quite frequently. So now they unlock at certain turns if you are playing as Gondor. However, if you take Minas Morgul, Cirith Ungol or Morannon before the Nazgul are fully unlocked, then many more of them will unlock quicker. So if you rush your way through Mordor, then of course the Nazgul will spawn to try and stop you. Also, the General's Bodyguard unit for Gondor, which I believe our good friend Denethor has as his standard bodyguard, have been renamed from General's Bodyguard to Captain's Bodyguard because of, as we've said, Tolkien's fondness of the word captain to lead his peoples, and indeed the name Captain General for the heir, that is the rank that has been applied to Boromir by Tolkien, not by us. That's not a made-up heir name, which is why it's one of the better ones. And of course it does use the term General, but Captain is far more preferred. So they're now called Captain's Bodyguard instead. Something that has been well publicised, Etheland now starts for Dol Amroth at the start of the game, and it now has a few buildings pre-built, including a dockyard, which is the second tier of port. So it starts with a good, solid port, which actually, in practice, unfortunately, only means an extra 100 gold coins at the start of the game. But of course has propensity to bring great money, great monetary gain and wealth to you as a Dol Amroth player. But at the start of the game will have very little impact. But Etheland just has a few pre-built buildings, and Baragund, who starts within it, now gets 2 units of Nimrodel mariners with him as well. And I say as well because he has them as his bodyguard. He always has, that hasn't changed, but that's now a feature for Dol Amroth, which is fan-blooming-tastic. The AI, Gondor, when controlled by the AI, now get 3 garrison units in Karasast and Pelargir, as well as the beefed-up garrison units they get in their core area around the Pelennor. And this is because, unfortunately, for whatever reason, Gondor does very poorly in the auto-resolve to Mordor. And so we're ever trying to find that fine line of balance where Gondor are slowly losing, but slow enough that you can come and save them. But it's a difficult one. With one tweak, for example, we've seen Gondor then completely go the other way and annihilate Mordor time and time and time again. And then again, with another tweak, we can see Mordor destroy Gondor within like 30 turns. So it's really difficult to try and get the balance. But little things like garrison troops do help the AI massively, particularly against other AIs. And on that same point, Rohan, when controlled by the AI, get 3 garrison units in Ginyard and 1 extra in Foldberg. So those are garrison units they will get regardless as to whether or not they have built the garrison building. The same with the 3 in Karasest and Pelargir. Now, I stress they are for the AI only. You will not get those extra garrison units anywhere, other than possibly the odd capital city does give extra garrison units for the human player as well, but it's really rare, and I can't think off the top of my head any that do. Moving over to Isengard, the sawmill that previously brought about the Ent invasion has now been relegated to a purely economic building, and it comes from Rochberg, because that's where Fangorn Forest is. It's a very, very good economic building, and if you can build it, it'll make you lots of money, but it has no link to the Ent script anymore. So you can build it at your leisure, and it will not matter. I'm not sure if turning that off is better or worse, but it does show you the tearing at the bottom of the screen, unfortunately, which is normally hidden underneath that UI, but without it, look how bad it is. You get this huge grey bar. Anyway, I'm probably making you all sick, sorry. I know I'm about to do it, so it's easy to prepare for it. You press the scroll lock button, by the way, to turn off this UI that you were just seeing there. The AI as Dale now receives Ber Gram in the Turn 1 expansion instead of Ber Marlinge, so they now get this region up here, Gramavold, instead of Gazar Uriel, which allows them to just solidify this area and gives them a much needed castle to help them start expanding out. The Moria Reclaimed and Fornost Reclaimed messages have been cut from the game because you may recall, although it may just pass into your subconscious because it happens literally every single game, if you play as anyone other than the nations that get those regions, then every single game at turn 1 you'll get a message saying Moria has been reclaimed and Fornost has been reclaimed. So we cut those messages out because it was just a waste of time. The Etheland message was also cut out, but of course that doesn't matter anymore anyway because Dol Amroth now start with that at turn 1. It's not part of the turn 1 expansion, you just start with Etheland. As you can see, we are literally just at the start of the game. I haven't ended turn yet, and it is theirs already. All units now replenish slightly faster from castles than they do in towns. This previously was the setup. Castles are always better for military than towns, but there were a lot of units that didn't conform to the pattern. So again, my love of uniformity, my extended thanks go to Hummingbird, who has gone through meticulously, it's the 3rd time I've used that this episode, has made sure that castles replenish faster. So castles are always better locations to train your troops. They won't give you any experience bonuses anymore, because we're trying to cut those out, but they will give you faster units. So a unit will train every 10 turns in Calenhad, and it might train every 15 turns in Karasast. So it's that little change there. They can just get troops faster. So they're much better for military. A very interesting and... it's not that interesting, I suppose. And now we're just wasting time. Gan Altan, the Nazgul for Mordor. His story has been reworded by myself so that he gets the ring. It's a very minor point, but he gets the ring after Sauron has conquered Ostin-Edil and therefore got the rings himself. So Gan Altan previously acquired the rings before Sauron even got them from the elves, which was of course wrong. So Gan Altan's story has been completely reworded, and he now obtains the rings after taking the fight right up to the elves up in Lindon itself. And then there were further other little reworks to it as well, so it's no longer as much of a law break as it was. Speaking of Mordor, if you manage to take the great city of Minas Tirith, then the White Tower of Ecthelion will now train for you Temple Wards at a rate of 1 every 40 turns. So you get some Dark Númenóreans recognizing your conquest of the Gondorians. Sauron's bodyguards' mass attack and defense have all been boosted, as well as he's now been given the light spear trait, so that he actually gets a little bit of a buff against cavalry without nerfing him against infantry too much. So Sauron's bodyguard has been improved across the board. When you're playing as Dunland, Enedwaith now takes Siduri in the turn 1 auto expansion, which they didn't used to. They used to get Bregost and they get Londere, but they didn't get Siduri. And as unfortunately as is shown, if you're playing as Dunland, Enedwaith will spend way too long trying to get Siduri, and for some reason they just can't take it. And they might spend 20 turns trying to capture Siduri, and it completely nerfs them, and it means that you can attack them totally unimpeded and just march through their heartlands without any trouble. So that has just been given to Enedwaith if you're playing as Dunland. If you're playing as anyone else, it doesn't matter too much. The AI don't tend to take advantage of it, but as a player you can completely take advantage of the fact that Enedwaith's military is very far away from you and being beaten by barbarians. And lastly, before we jump over to the battle map then, the final point is that Cerin Amroth has been re-added to the game as a fort, but has been given a unique, if I can get the camera on it, there we are, has been given a unique battle map. So Cerin Amroth is now in the game as a unique little hill that you can fight, and gives Lothlorien some early tier free upkeep, which they did not have before. Now, of course, Caras Galadhon has been reworked as well, and that is going to be where we start our jaunt on the battle map. We shall deal with Boromir and Caras Galadhon, and I will see you then for the second half where we will deal with the battle map aspects. Welcome then to Caras Galadhon, and the first thing you will note as we soar is the word I'm after, above the trees, is of course the new tree model that the elite dwarf added to Lothlorien, this new type of Malorn tree. But you will note there's obviously smaller ones dotted in and out. But one of the key things that you'll take away is that the map does not appear to be flickering very much, if at all. Let's just turn all those back on and go to 0.1 so that we can show the map without the big paused icon in the middle. So this is the new Caras Galadhon, and we are playing as Gondor because, as you saw just then, Boromir has finally been given his battle plate model, and no longer is he wearing his travel clothing in the middle of Gondor. So he finally wears plate on the field. This is a change that's been a very long time coming. And there is his new bodyguard, the Osgiliath veterans, looking absolutely fantastic. Of course, you can upgrade them later on. Oh, no, indeed, they start upgraded. Sorry, ignore me. This is the upgraded version. They've already got their plate mail. So they stand quite nicely with Boromir, who stands out a little. With he's got a little bit of a cape. It's not a little bit of a cape. He has a cape, but he doesn't have a helmet, so he stands out a bit. But Caras Galadhon, there you can see the high trees of the city reaching into the sky. This battle map has been significantly enhanced, as anyone will tell you. Although, do excuse the textures, that's because I've not copied everything across properly. So they're not actually black. That's just an error on my part. But this is the entranceway then. So it's a sort of, there's a moat now that actually defends the wall. Let's go all the way around. So there's no longer any really stupid access points like there were before, where the wall actually ended and there was a bit of a hill over it. I'm sure many of you remember it. And the game didn't technically allow you through it, but you absolutely would have been able to go through it, and it just made no sense. So now Caras Galadhon has its own moat and a wall that goes all the way around, and you have to get through this gate, and there are 2 towers that will fire upon you. and then you come into the large starting area where you then fight your way up to the square, which is right at the back here. So you've got a nice little bridge here, which is perfect for Lothlorien with your archers. You can fire as the enemy gets through the gate. You can stack your archers. You can pop archers up on the rank here, and they'll fire over the wall as the enemy comes. Again, note that there's almost no tree flickering going on anymore. It's absolutely glorious. Many of the assets in this new Caras Galadon have been taken from Battle for Middle-earth, and I'm terribly sorry that the textures are black. I must have done something wrong. I mean, I just copy and paste, but I'm sure that is almost certainly my fault, because RK has said there's no issues. So there won't be black when they're in your game. And then there is the square at the very back. So there is this extra side ramp here that the enemy can come around to you from that side. So it's not there's not just one way in. Of course, the AI will almost certainly just slog their way up the middle. But if you attack Caras Galadon, then you've got these side ramps as well that will take you to the square, which then is enclosed a little. You can see that there's rocks on the left and the right. This is an absolutely fantastic improvement, and another key reason why this mod would be nothing without RK. Hummingbird and I have been here for a very long time. We've done lots of coding. Hummingbird has done lots to the unit models, and we've brought about lots of scripts and changes like that. But without RK, so many battle maps would be broken. They wouldn't even be here. They would just be infinitely worse than they are. Gundabad's, the faction of Gundabad's, almost all the regions near and around Gundabad owe their life to RK, and he has improved this mod so much. And I also, of course, have to extend our thanks to the Elite Dwarf as well for improving these tree models and removing that flickering. I don't know if it was RK or Ted that removed the flickering, but it's so nice to not have the trees popping in and out of existence. So this is the much easier to defend Caras Galadon. As you would hope, this is one of the major elven cities in Middle-earth. It should not have been a piddly little green, basically hedge wall with a tiny little gate. I mean, we added the gate as an afterthought. Whoever created the original Caras Galadon didn't even give it a gate. It was such an easy battle map. So now it actually will be one you have to fight to take. And I hope I've done it justice as we've whizzed around it here. There's actually more buildings in the settlement now. It looks like people actually live here, and it's no longer just 4 trees with a square at the bottom. I can't express to you how pleased I am that this map has changed and how wonderful this new map looks. I really, really like it. It really makes me want to play as Lothlorien so that I can actually defend it, because it's such a good place to defend now. But do note, of course, that so if an enemy unit now spawns behind, which sometimes does happen, if you assault it with 2 armies, it may well be that one of them spawns behind. They now have even further to travel to get to the front, and they'll be, the entire time they walk around the walls, that central plateau, the elves will be able to fire on you as you make your way around. So do watch out for that. Also note that you can stand on these, the black textures at the moment that I apologise for. You can get troops up on those, so that part of the wall is mountable by your forces, so you can fire from there. And I know that RK was saying he was adding walkways, and I'm fairly sure that some of these walkways will work. Although I could be talking out of my proverbial there, because I'm not 100% on that. I think the walkways may in fact actually be the ones around the wall there. But in any event, it's a glorious city, and the new tree models work fantastically. And you now do actually feel like you are in a golden wood. It no longer feels like, I'm sure it was quite green. It was decidedly green before now. But anyway, there we are. That's the only, that's not the only battle map change, but that's the only new city map that I'm going to show you. Although we could try and fight in the Kerin Amroth, couldn't we? I'll try and set up a battle in Kerin Amroth, but I'm not sure I can, because I'd need the AI to go inside of it. No, I don't think I can. So we won't see Kerin Amroth, but that's right. It's only the fort battle map. So that's Caras Galadon, and now we'll just jump in and look at some of the changes to the units in a normal battle map. Welcome then to some changes to the battle map. Now there's only one new unit, and it's quasi-new really, but it's just visual changes. First thing to note though is that we've gone through the text descriptions of any unit that uses armor piercing as a secondary weapon and have written that into the descriptions. So the unit off the top of my head are the Dunedain bodyguard unit, who have armor piercing bows and armor piercing axes as their secondary weapon. And previously the game would only tell you the primary weapon, whether or not that is armor piercing. So now if a unit has 2 weapons, and you will know which ones are armor piercing, whether it's one or both. So that's the first point, but now we move on to the actual units. The first thing is the Valerian Honor Guard. Now, this is one of the first quasi-new units because you have seen the Valerian Honor Guard unit before because they won the top 10 shock infantry video. Unfortunately, since that time, it was decided by the team that they didn't really fit as shock infantry and would serve much better as possibly the game's best pike unit. And they have been changed as such. Oh, no, I need to turn on the... wrong one, F7, I need F7. They have been changed now, as I say, into a formidable pike unit. An attack of 10, a 32 defense, and I don't think Adrian has been done with the charge bonus yet, so ignore that. But they obviously are the unit that you get by taking Buzz-Radum and enduring the coming new Balrog attack, reclaiming Buzz-Radum, and then you are then able to train them. They are really, really rare. They come very late in the game. They only come from one location, but they are absolutely fantastic. But the model itself, it has undergone some visual tweaks by the team. So Hummingbird has made them blue instead of red, and a few other tweaks here and there. But the actual model itself was created by Eisen in the Heirs of Elendil submod, and they very graciously provided the unit to us. I don't think this visual design is actually in their publicly available mod yet. So this is all still behind the scenes stuff, but they very kindly gave us the model, and then Hummingbird just tweaked it a little bit to fit in with the Ered Luin colour scheme, so that is the Valerian Honor Guard. You will note that they are a pike, but they wield this sort of fantasy halberd blade thing, sort of axe head pike, which just gives them a visual distinctive look. I think looks very cool. Others may disagree, each to their own. Moving on then, we shall jump over to Dulguldor. Yes, the other quasi-new unit is Dulguldor's bodyguard unit. So they no longer are clones of Mordor's bodyguard unit. They are just called Mirkwood bodyguards, but they are distinct as bodyguards because they throw axes. So they have a couple of axes to throw into the battle before they charge, and then when they are in the battle themselves, they are two-handed, dual-wielding axe warriors. So they throw an axe, and then they have an axe in each hand when they're in the battle. So they're a much more aggressive version of Mordor's bodyguard unit. They still have a very similar visual design, but it has been tweaked a little by Hummingbird with a few extra additions. But they are no longer just clones of Mordor's bodyguard unit, which is good. Then we move on to Darwinian, who have had... Oh, my things are still showing when I hover over them. We don't want that. Darwinian have had a few visual changes. So first of all, the Darwinian Armsman, the unupgraded version, as many of you may well know from the preview channel on DAC. There's a couple of elves mixed in amongst the roster now. The elves are the ones, obviously, with the hoods. So the Armsman unit, which is available whether you choose humans or elves, it's available for both routes, now has both types of people. And that is, of course, because we've respected the Darwinian choice to no longer be you're choosing Northmen or you're choosing elves, but now, no matter what you choose, the elves are coming to join you, and it's whether you use them militarily or domestically or economically. And so to reflect that, the elves are part of the military a little more now, because it is very much now a merging of the two cultures, whether you want it or not. The Darwinian Armsmen have also got a little bit of an upgrade there, and you can see more vividly the Stark mix, where the elves have now taken off their hoods, but the humans have donned helmets, and so they have a cool little visual upgrade. In addition, the High Paladins, Darwinian's bodyguard unit, now also reflects this union, and it's fantastic, isn't it? Seeing them standing side by side. So you've got Morroquendi units, the Dark Elves elite units, mixed in amongst the High Paladins. But do note, they no longer have a visual upgrade, so that is just what it will look like all the time now. Now, this is, of course, the golden version, which was the Darwinian Elven upgrade version, but it does mean that they won't visually change when you upgrade them now. That's just what they start looking like. And the elves have their own two-handed sword, the humans have their own two-handed sword, and it's the first sort of mixed race, if I can call them that, unit that we've actually got in the mod, I think. Well, these two combined. And it's very cool. It works really, really well. It really does feel like it's made up half and half. So that's absolutely fantastic, and really gives Darwinian, again, more flavour and more fun. And then we come to the Emmanuel units for the High Elves. They have been redesigned courtesy of Arthalion, so we are grateful to him. They've been quite nicely redesigned, actually. Quite a stark visual difference in the leather that they adorn, and then they upgrade to look like these fellows here, where there's a bit more armour going through. A couple of them now have helmets as well. And they just look really good. Remember, Emmanuel are your Noldor units, and they are very powerful. They're very strong units, so very good ones to have in the roster. These are the Emmanuel Rangers, so again you can see the visuals. This is the unupgraded version, changes to their breastplate, and they're all wearing crown isn't the word, is it? What am I trying to think of? I can't recall. And there they are again. These are them upgraded. Now, something else that you may note as we're looking at these horses is famously and quite controversially, apparently to anyone that rides a horse, the elves are famed for not riding their horse with any kind of paraphernalia. So they ride them bareback. This is Tolkien remarks about this on a couple of occasions, and it is well known. It is, of course, foolish, really, because the rider would have to be fantastically skilled in order to not fall off all the time. And indeed, of course, Gandalf, Shadowfax famously refuses to wear any kind of saddle, so Gandalf has to ride Shadowfax bareback. But that's been implemented at the lower tier for many elven units, so they now have these. They're just. What's the word I'm looking for? Saddle. It is saddle. They are saddle-less. And lastly, here are the Emmanuel Riders. So again, same visual upgrades. This is just the spear version. These are the unupgraded ones. There's these crowns going on. They've got it is just that they've got more detailed sort of breastplates, really more detailed leathers. And then they upgrade to look like those fellows with the nice helmets and a bit of more armor, a bit more shine. There's some chainmail by the looks of it going through. And again, another unit that rides this saddle-less horse. And that is it for the visual changes, and that is it for Developer Diary number 31. So I do hope this has you salivating over the release of version 5, which as ever will come out on 7. But until we speak again, dear friends, do enjoy what we've covered today. Feel free to prepare your essay-long reasons as to why our charge calculations are incorrect, and I shall look forward to reading those detailedly, completely, and in their fullest extent. And until we speak again, Nevair Naden Vedamad Melonin, and farewell.